To begin, I see Jenny's here. Welcome. And we're going to, I muted you, Jenny, so if you need to talk, you can unmute yourself there. So, let's pray. We need to pray. Father, thank you for your Holy Spirit. Thank you for your work in our lives. Thank you for teaching us and helping us and loving us and caring for us and directing us. Thank you for your wonderful, wonderful love and your grace that you pour out upon us. Just ask that you would minister to us tonight and give us your understanding and your wisdom as we continue to study in regard to conflict resolution. Bless our night with your presence, and we give you thanks for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I am going to, towards the end of the meeting, give you a study guide for the final exam. I got to make sure I've covered everything on here. So if not, I can tell you. Let me look at this right quickly. Yeah, pretty much. Probably the very last one on here we won't cover, therefore it won't be on the exam. Okay. But anyway, I'll give you that at the end. I'm not going to give it to you now, or you'd be asking questions on that. And I want to go a little further tonight. Before I get started, though, any questions or thoughts on conflict resolution, stuff we've covered, anger, conflict modes, forgiveness? Any thoughts, any questions? No? Makes sense? And as Isaiah said, he's been an orange splitter instead of an orange peeler this week. And but at least, see, we recognize it now when it's happening.
Yeah.
And that's a beginning point to try to change. So, okay, no questions. I'm going to go into a deep subject, so.
Oh, no.
We're going to deal tonight with trust injuries and how to repair trust injuries. And it is a deep subject, and it conjures up many thoughts, but we're just going to spend some time here and let the Lord speak to us and help us. Learning to trust, the phrase learning to trust again implies that there was once a time when we could trust somebody, but we can't trust them anymore. Somehow we've lost that ability to trust. Okay? And one of the things that we're going to look at in this session has to do with when we initially learn to trust and how that trust has been injured within us. Okay? Things that have happened to us that have impacted our ability to trust. We're going to look at how we deal with those experiences and at the resulting effects of our relationships. We have to learn how to take those parts of ourselves that have been injured and damaged and expose them to the light so that we can once again rebuild the trust that maybe we've lost. And in this area, as well as in any other, growth is a process that takes time. You don't develop trust overnight. In fact, if somebody has proven untrustworthy, not only is it a process of being able to once again regain trust. But it's also incumbent upon them to deserve your trust, right? Just because we want to trust doesn't mean we can trust. It's incumbent upon the other person in order to rebuild that trust. So why is it so hard to trust? See, trusting is not easy. And that's because in the past, we have trusted and we've gotten hurt, right? And it's hard to trust in the face of hurt, betrayal, and abandonment. We may have been threatened, we may have been judged, our insecurities may have been reinforced as others subjected us to unrealistic expectations. The list goes on and on. It's almost endless as to reasons why we sometimes have a problem with trust. In fact, when you think about it, why should we even trust again? When we've trusted somebody and they've abused our trust, sometimes we think, why should I even go through this again? But there's an old song that was written, well, old, it is old, back in about the 70s. For some of you, that's really old, okay? And it's by the Gaithers. Anybody know who the Gaithers are? No?
No.
And here's how the song goes. I'm going to sing it for you. There are times when living and loving brought pain, and I promised I would never let it happen again. But I found out that loving is well worth the risk. For even when losing, you win. I'm gonna live like, I can't remember it. I'm gonna give like there's no more to give. I'm gonna love till there's just no more love. I'm gonna live. I can't remember the words. You can never outlove the Lord. And see, the problem is we say, I'm through. I'm not going to open myself up again. But when you do, you lose. But when you take the risk, even if you lose some battles, you win. Because going into yourself is always detrimental, right? It's always harmful. And we need to step out and take the risk and try to love again. But we sometimes ask, why should we do it? It only leads to more pain. It hurts too much. But God didn't design us to be isolationists. He designed us to be in community. He designed us to be in relationship. With Him and with others. Therefore, we have to find a way to heal our trust injuries and repair our relationships. And that's what we're going to be talking about, at least the first part of tonight. So we need to ask ourselves what things have happened that left us feeling hurt or abandoned. Well, first of all, we do not live in a world that builds trust. Right? We do not live in a world that builds trust. Why? Because of sin. Because of the fall. Have you ever gotten to the place where you weren't even sure you could trust yourself? I have. There are times, as an example, I will get up some mornings and the way I'm feeling, I will say out loud, I will not make a major decision today. Because I don't trust myself today. Okay? The way I'm feeling, depression or whatever it might be. Perhaps you made bad choices in relationships. And so we just say, I can't trust myself, you know. But lack of trust doesn't always come from a history of serious events in our lives. Sometimes just the day-to-day experiences we go through can build up a pattern of trust injuries. I'm gonna read you a little story to show how this happened to a couple where they little things developed into something big when all they were doing was preparing to hide Easter eggs for their young children. Listen to this story. And this will mean more to you the older you get. Okay. The husband was busy working in his study on a Saturday night, waiting for his wife to come in and share the plan with him. We already know where this is headed, right? She's ready to share the plan. After all, she was a real holiday person, always going all out to celebrate and make each holiday a special event for her children, and Easter was no exception. The husband privately thought that sometimes she went a bit too far in this area. So when the wife popped her head into the study and began to explain, we're going to put this here and do that over there, the husband unfeelingly said, can't we do this a little less elaborately this year? Do we have to go to all that trouble? How do you think the wife felt as she went back to her preparations? Rejected, unappreciated, condemned. In the meantime, the husband went back to his work, assuming that she would reappear when she was done in the kitchen coloring the eggs. She didn't. She would come and ask him to help hide them. But time went on and she didn't reappear. Finally, the wife stuck her head in the door and said, it's almost time for bed. He replied, what about hiding the Easter eggs? She said, I'm almost done. And this made him confused. He said, I thought you were going to come and get me and we would do it together. To which she replied, well, you didn't sound like you wanted to be part of it, so I decided to just do it myself. The husband ended up feeling left out of something special to him. He thought to himself, it's not that I didn't want any part of it. I kind of like getting into my jammies and hiding the Easter eggs. I just didn't want to go to that extent. Now I've been left out. Okay? So you can see how that they have had these issues before, these struggles before. And all of a sudden, what have they lost? They've lost trust in one another. And they both lost out on the ability of being able to work together to do something for the kids. Okay? You say, well, that's just a story somebody wrote up. No, it's probably a story somebody went through. And we go through similar stories in marriage all the time. What happened between these two? The husband made an insensitive comment without really thinking of its effect. The wife added his tone and his implied criticism to her own history of trust injuries and reacted in a typical fashion. Let me one of the students need to help them out here. The wife added his tone and his implied criticism to her own history of trust injuries. Did you hear that? She added his tone and his statement to her own history of trust injuries. We all have a history, don't we? And somebody says something, and they may be saying it one way, but we're hearing it another way. We're hearing it based on the way we view life because of what we've experienced and our history. And she reacted in typical fashion. She withdrew and decided to handle things herself. She backed out of relationship with him for the moment. Neither one chose to confront the real issue of what had happened. And it's likely that most people in this situation would just bury the incident and not deal with it. But after repeated episodes, these little trust injuries grow into problems that are large, causing separateness, isolation, hiding, and unforgiveness. Little things become big things. One of the biggest problems with trust injuries is that we end up deciding that relationships aren't worth it. They just aren't any good. I can do better alone. I can do better by myself. I don't need anybody else. And that is a lie of the enemy. We do need other people. We decide to be lone rangers. We back away from existing relationships and we refuse to form new ones. We hide behind our walls of self-protection, desperately wanting people to reach out to us, but living in a way in which we're not allowing them to. Do you hear what I just said? I don't know how many people I have had say to me in my years of ministry, I'm going to go to church somewhere else because I can't build relationships here. Why? The people aren't friendly towards me. Are you friendly towards them? See? There's usually a reason they're not friendly. We've built up a wall and we don't even realize we're hiding behind it. Okay? And so we need to these walls, they say stay away. On the inside, we're wanting people to reach out to us, but our walls say stay away. And we're lonely, but we don't dare attempt to form any more relationship. So the first step to recovery and to rebuilding trust injuries is to go back and examine the root problem. The first step is to go back and examine the root problem. So let's define basic trust. Going to define basic trust. In fact, is basic trust a childlike quality? Is basic trust feeling comfortable and relaxed, or something that is built up over time? We have to understand that trust involves taking risks. Trust involves taking risks. You will never be able to rebuild trust without taking a risk. A person who has basic trust has a willingness to take risks in relationships. So let me define a basic trust. Basic trust is a stance that the world and I are predictably good, not perfect, not that man is basically good. Those with basic trust have a foundational sense that they are pretty good and trustworthy people. They can reach out to others and form loving relationships. They know there are untrustworthy people in the world, but they don't expect to find them everywhere. And they don't automatically expect to be in relationship with them. When you have lost basic trust, you lose that sense, and you tend to think that if you put yourself out there, you are going to be hurt. Why? Because your mindset says and your worldview says, most people are out to get me. Right? We need to get over that. And let's be honest. Are there people out there to get you? Yeah. Yeah. But you're not going to know which ones until you put yourself out there. Not everybody is out there to get you. I think I might have mentioned in this class a person, but if I have, she fits in here, of a girl I had in a class one time that was just different. And she was one of those that pushed everybody away. She really had no friends. And when I would ask for, it was one of those 3-day modulars where it was like 8:30 in the morning till 6 at night for 3 days we were in class. And she would enter into discussion, but almost every time she said something, it was sort of in another realm. It wasn't quite there. But every time she said something, I thought about what she was saying and I tried to bring it into context. And I'll never forget the third day about lunchtime, I'm getting ready to walk out and she's outside and she stops me. She said, Dr. Hooker, may I talk to you for just a minute? And I said, sure. And she said, I'll never forget, as long as I live, I'll never forget this. With tears in her eyes, she said, thank you for accepting me. Why? She'd been rejected and rejected and rejected, and I'm sure she thought nobody would accept her. Right? But we should be safe people. We're going to talk about safe people in a few minutes. We're going to talk about safe churches. There are safe churches and there are unsafe churches. And we're going to talk about that. So, but in order to walk in basic trust, you can't believe that everybody's out to get you, or you will not be walking in basic trust. Those people lacking basic trust, on the other hand, as we've been talking about, have an almost paranoid stance of distrust. They go through life skeptical and afraid. The law of the jungle reigns in their lives. I've got to eat you before you eat me. And these people assume that everyone is out to get them or mess up their lives, so they don't dare risk entering into relationships. And there are people on both ends of the spectrum of basic trust. Most of us are somewhere in between. Are we not? Most of us are somewhere in between. All of us have suffered trust injuries to one degree or another. And they've affected us in varying degrees, and we've responded to them in different ways. It's interesting to note that when we look in the Old Testament, there's a word for trust in the Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, a word for trust that refers to being careless. Care hyphenated less. What's that all about, to be careless? Being careless means that we don't have to be afraid all the time. We can stop having to always protect ourselves. Remember Jesus said, cast all your care, or Paul said, cast all your care on him, for he cares for you. We need to live a careless life. Listen carefully to me when I tell you. Listen carefully to me when I tell you. That the more we care about people's reactions to us, the more it's about us. And the more it's about pride. Now, listen carefully to me when I tell you, I know this because I lived through this. And I had to learn how not to live this way. Anyway, I had to start living more careless. Not everybody's going to like me. Oh, well. I can't make everybody like me. Okay? And after all, it's not about me anyway. And so there's a Hebrew word that refers to being careless. We don't have to be afraid all the time. We can stop having to protect ourselves. When other people have proved themselves to be trustworthy in our lives, we develop a sense of basic trust that enables us to feel careless. We decide that perhaps we don't have to be afraid or cautious all the time. We feel that maybe we can actually take some risks. We can be careless with safe people. We can be careless with safe people. Safe people keep our secrets. They allow us to be vulnerable. We can share some of our weird and crazy thoughts with them, knowing that we won't be judged. They listen to our emotional side, sadness, anger, rage, and sexual feelings without condemning or casting blame. Trustworthy, safe people communicate to us that they will always be there as a foundation in our lives. And relationships with them allow the carelessness within us to come out. There are safe people and there are unsafe people. And safe people love us despite what they know about us. I'm thinking of a person right now that recently found out they're going through some things that they should not be going through and they should not be putting their partner through. And then they found out that I knew. And they have not wanted to get around me. But God orchestrated it the other day to where we almost ran straight into each other. And what did I do? I walked over to her, a younger lady, and I hugged her and I gave her a kiss on her cheek and I let her know how much I loved her. Why? Because it's not about what she has done or what she hasn't done is not as to whether I should accept her or not. Safe people are there for you even when they know what you're going through. Even when they know what you're doing. But we tend to shy away from even the safe people because we're not sure if they're safe or not. Isn't that true? How are they going to react? When she saw me, I could see the look on her face. The look of utter terror as to how I was going to react. Hey, I haven't been perfect, right? And Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, but to love the world. Okay? And we need to be the same way. So we need to find safe people. You'll never get over your trust injuries until you find some safe people. And you begin to take baby steps. I'm not saying that in order to regain trust, you have to just dive in. It's baby steps. It's small increments. But you have to find some safe people, and then you have to take those steps, those baby steps. You have to let them help you. You know, as kids, we jumped off our beds. And what did our dads do? They stepped back and they caught us, right? And remember learning how to swim. Dad or grandpa's in the pool saying, "Come on, I'll catch you." And at first, they won't jump until they've at least got a hold of your fingers, right? And then little by little, you can step back a little more, and they begin to what? Gain trust. Your dad too, yeah. Well, maybe you needed it, but you understand what I'm saying? That's how we learn. As children, that's how we learn, and as adults, that's how we also regain trust. So how is our capacity for basic trust destroyed, and what are the results? The foundations for living with a sense of basic trust and carelessness in our lives are laid in infancy. Newborns let you know that they have a need. Do they not? They know how to let you know that they have a need. And as this process is repeated hundreds of times, them letting you know that they have a need and then you coming to the rescue, it builds trust. It builds trust. They begin to have a sense that when they have a need, it's going to be met. It's a sense of basic trust. And most of us have had our capacity for basic trust shattered through many people who should have been trustworthy, but they weren't. And when that happens and our basic trust has been shattered, our friendships become shallow. Our marriages lack true intimacy. We can't seem to connect with others, and we wonder why not. We become stranded on the sidelines of life. And listen carefully to me when I say we begin to connect to things rather than to people. We begin to connect to things rather than to people. When our capacity for basic trust is destroyed, we begin to see things as safer than people. As we withdraw from relationships, we try to fill the void with TV or ice cream or computers or video games or pornography, and the list goes on and on. We develop our addictions out of our inability to connect with other people. We develop our addictions out of inability to connect with other people. I went I had a class one time when I was getting my, it was my master's, a Master of Divinity. And the class was on sexual addiction and how to deal with people that were involved with sexual addiction, were addicted sexually. And I'll never forget the term that this author used when referring to pornography. This is the term that he used when referring to pornography. False intimacy. False intimacy. Because we can't have real intimacy with a real person. Now, yeah, we can have sex. There's a difference between sex and real intimacy. And because we can't have real intimacy with our spouse or whatever, that people go to pornography, and it's false intimacy, whereby you can get involved to some degree sexually without having responsibility and without having to open yourself up. Okay. I'm going to say something now because you're all adults, even though some of you are young adults. I'm going to say something now. Have you ever realized that the only species that has sex face to face are humans? There's a reason for that. It's to be more than a physical experience. It's to be an intimate spiritual experience. But some people have a problem with that because they like the sex part. It's the intimacy part that's giving them problems. The taking responsibility that's giving them problems. So it's easier to watch somebody on a screen than to be held accountable in real life. Does this make sense? So these things become a destructive force in our lives, and the more we become connected to them, the more withdrawn we become. trusting is not just a goal, it's a part of a process, and it's a byproduct of healthy relationships. So we have to choose. If we have trust injuries, we have to choose to re-enter the process of learning how to trust. And it is a process. And sometimes it's a painful process. If you have trust injuries, listen carefully to me right now. If you have trust injuries and you are trying to regain the arena of having them rebuilt and trusting again, listen carefully to me. You will get hurt again. There will be some pain. Why? Not everybody's trustworthy. But listen, when I say it's a process. And it is worth the minor setbacks to gain the freedom of eventually trusting again. So how can we re-enter the process of learning how to trust? You have to start by learning how to trust the right people. We learn how to trust in areas where we haven't been safe in the past. We have to admit or acknowledge that it is possible to learn to trust again. Either we can stay detached and numbly walk through life, or we can take the risk and learn how to reclaim our basic trust that was lost. So we have to learn how to trust the right people. How do we know who are the right people? We learn through trial and error. We learn through observation. You observe people for a while. You start by sharing. If you're not sure about the person, you share something small before you share something big. Right? And it's baby steps. One of the things I do when I mentor somebody, when I enter into a mentoring relationship with somebody, the very first meeting, I say this. As we enter into this process, it won't be long before I will realize areas in your life that need to be addressed. And when I recognize an area in your life that needs to be addressed, I want the permission. Today, I want your permission that when I see areas in your life that need to be addressed, that I can approach those areas. But not only do you need to give me permission today to do that, I also give you permission that when I approach an area, if you're not ready to deal with it yet, all you have to do is say, I'm not ready to deal with that, and I will not deal with it till you're ready. Why? Because until you're ready, there's no use me trying to deal with it. Right? Does that, and just listen to, I'm not trying to say I'm a safe person. I'm using this as an example. Is not that the sign of a safe person? I'm not going to force you into somewhere you're not ready to go. Okay? Why? Because if I do, you may be going there physically, but you might not be going there emotionally. And real change is not taking place. So let's talk about the 4 stages of development. The 4 stages of development when it comes to all these trust injuries, etc. The first stage is attachment. Attachment. The first and foundational stage of trust development is the ability to be attached to other people in relationship. As we've already discussed, this starts when we're infants. And attachment helps us to develop a capacity to take in love. And our ability to receive love from others is directly related to our capacity to trust. If we can't trust, then we won't be able to allow people to truly love us. I was going over my notes earlier today for tonight. And at 71 years of age, going over the notes tonight, thinking about how important it is for a mother and father to attach to a baby, etc. I realized that I missed that somewhere back there. Or I wouldn't have faced some of the issues I faced later in life. Well, I know how I missed it from my dad. My parents were divorced when I was 5. Okay. But even before that, I don't know how I missed it with him. But my mom. I finally figured out how I missed it with my mom. Now, did she love me? Sure she did. I know my mom loved me. Did she meet my basic needs as a baby? I guess. But somehow there was some lack of intimacy or lack of attachment as a young boy, as a baby, because I was never real close to my mom. And when my stepfather was treating me the way he was treating me when I was growing up, I looked back, I was thinking, where is mom in all this? Why isn't mom there? Why isn't she sticking up for me? Now, older, looking back, I realized my mom did the best she could do, being raised the way she was raised. I realized the reason she wasn't there when my stepdad was treating me the way he was is she'd already gone through one failed marriage and she didn't want to go through another. So I became collateral damage. Has that affected me in my later years? Drastically. To the point that it's very hard for me to have intimate relationships. Why? I didn't learn how to form them. Is this making sense to anybody? And had I have had a different raising in my early years, the attachment would have been stronger and intimacy would have been something that would have been easy for me rather than something that's hard for me. Not blaming mom, not blaming dad. It's just the hand I was dealt. And they did the best they could do. But now it's a process. So attachment is supposed to start as a child. Those who've learned to trust through attachment and bonding as they've grown up are able to recognize their needs. They're able to feel connected with others and enter into relationships with carelessness. They admit their loneliness and their need for people in their lives. Whereas when my wife asks me, how do you feel? My first response is, I don't know. Why? I was never trained to feel. I was trained to be numb. And while I desperately, growing up as a young person, everything, wanted relationships in my life, friends, and one of the hardest things for me to do was have strong friendships. All my friendships were very shallow. I'm being very vulnerable to you today, trying to help you understand some of this stuff, you know, and I, you know, I'm opening myself up here. So, can someone go down and let Josh in?
Oh. Nose goes. I don't.
8:30.
On the other hand of the spectrum, well, those who learn to trust through attachment and bonding recognize their needs, feel connected, etc. On the other end of the spectrum, you find those who totally detached. They say things like, I never get lonely, I don't need people, that part of me died years ago, or I'm just depressed all the time and I don't know why. They're walking in denial about their need for relationship, either denying the need altogether or not allowing themselves to acknowledge it. They substitute things for people, and they end up either bitter or wondering why they're never able to feel fulfilled. If the thing or the addiction is removed from their lives, detached people can become terrified at the loss. They've been using the addiction to fill the void that comes from detachment. Is this making sense to you? Sometimes people don't run away physically, they simply distance themselves emotionally. They're there, but they're not there. Okay? So attachment, as we said, initially starts with our parents or our caregivers. It's not only as crucial as a foundation for our human relationships, it's crucial in our relationship with God. God created us to need relationships. And He wants us to attach and bond with people and with Him. He wants us to know that He is trustworthy to the end. But let me tell you something. If you've never learned to attach to people, it's hard to attach to God. Now, I'm not saying it's hard to be saved. It's hard to be intimate. I don't know how many times through the years I would watch somebody that had a real close, intimate relationship with the Lord. And I would think, why can't I have a relationship like that? Does God speak to me? Yes. Do I hear Him? Yes. Does He love me? Yes. Am I His son? Yes. But I don't have that same type of intimacy that some people have. It's not because I don't love Him, and it's not because He doesn't love me. It's because I don't know how. Is this resonating with anybody? It's because I don't know how. And does that mean that He and I are not close? No, that doesn't mean it at all. It just means I've not learned how to completely open myself up to Him. Right? I've got a ways to go. It's part of this attachment. God gives us parents and caregivers to serve as models of His trustworthiness. But if they haven't served as models, it's hard for us to, we project that onto God. We project it onto Him. It's very challenging and very hard to experience attachment with God when we've never experienced it on a human level. So the first stage of development is attachment. The second stage is protest. Protest. When we first experience someone breaking trust, we often go through a stage of protest. When trust is broken for an infant, what do? They scream and they holler and they yell. They let everyone know that they're very unhappy. And adults do that also by saying things such as, I don't like what's happening here. What's wrong? What are you doing? Let's talk about this. The prophet Isaiah said, come and let us reason together. Throughout the Old Testament, we see God's example of protesting Israel's betrayal in their relationship with Him. He continually goes after them, calling out, come back. Let's reason together. Consider what you're doing. Let's talk about what's going on. And this is a model of how we need to protest when our trust has been broken in a relationship. We should go to the other person and make a plea for us to discuss the situation, to reason together, to figure out what happened. The third stage is despair. Despair. So, if there's no response or reasoning together as a result of our protest, we end up in the very lonely state of despair. Despair is the place of being in uncomforted sadness. That's a great statement, isn't it? Uncomforted sadness. We've been abandoned by someone whom we've trusted. Our trust has been shattered. Often we can hardly believe it's happened. We might latch on to denial as if it were a lifeline. We say, well, the person will come back, I'll be all right, so on and so forth. Just a temporary situation. But the problem inherent with this method of coping is that we can live in unreality for years. Some depressed children never grow out of despair for their entire lives because they're still waiting for that person or that parent to return and to be reliable. Usually it's not going to happen. Usually if it hasn't happened by now, it's not going to happen. Listen carefully to me when I tell you this. You can't expect more out of somebody than they have to give. Sometimes we're still waiting for that parent to return and that parent to say they're sorry or whatever the case may be. We need to just get with reality and realize it's not going to happen. Why? They are incapable of doing it. We have to love them despite the fact. Right? Some people are, they're still waiting for a mom or a dad to say they're sorry. It's not going to happen. We need to get on with our lives. And I'm here to tell you that there are some people that are 6 feet under that are still controlling people's lives. They're dead and buried. And we're still on hold. And we need to learn that there comes a point where you have to move on with your life. So despair is a very interesting place that we do not want to be in. And then the fourth stage, after despair, and by the way, going back to despair, let me just say, as I've already said, they're incapable of offering to you what you need. You need to love them anyway and let it go. And then the fourth is detachment. The fourth stage is detachment. And detachment is very dangerous because when we detach, we've convinced ourselves that we no longer need other people. We no longer need relationships. This causes us to back away from God and the importance He places on relationship with Him and with others. When we've suffered enough pain from broken trust, we shut down and retreat within ourselves for self-protection. We retreat within ourselves for self-protection. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." Hope deferred makes the heart sick. If we've been hoping for a long time and it never comes, we become heart sick enough to detach. And detachment is a downward spiral that leads us into self-absorption and deeper despair. And the worst part is that we eventually just become numb. We never allow ourselves to feel again. We convince ourselves that we're fine because there's no more pain. And we push people away through bitterness and hostility. We continue to go through the motions of life, denying our emptiness. We may even go through the motions of religion. We simply keep existing within the glass walls of our self-made fortresses. And when you've reached this place, it's very difficult to get out. And sometimes we don't even realize that we need or want to get out. We've buried our feelings too deeply. You say, what would you do in a situation like that? There's only one hope, and his name is Jesus. You go to the Lord. And you recognize your inability to handle this yourself. And you need the help of the Holy Spirit. We often choose to reinforce our detachment through hiding. And this may take many different forms and styles, but the result is the same, keeping us detached from other people and God by hiding. We hide through devaluing neediness. That's one way. One way we hide is through devaluing neediness. We tell ourselves that we have no need of relationships, that we're just fine alone. Who needs parents anyway? Who needs a man? I only have to think of myself. I don't need friends. So on and so forth. Yes. Yes. Yes, it does. In fact, I think we talked about that while you were out for just a minute. In the despair turns into depression. Yeah, very much so. So ways of hiding. Number one, evaluating neediness. Number two, through hyper self-sufficiency. Hyper self-sufficiency. We are self-sufficient. I can take care of myself. I don't need anybody else or anything else. And the third way we hide is through codependency. Through codependency. Codependents don't allow themselves to be needy. Instead, they enter into relationships with other extremely needy people. And they have an unconscious goal to spend their whole lives, all their energy, taking care of other people's neediness. In this way, they can avoid having to admit their own need for relationship, connection, and attachment. So one way we reinforce detachment is through hiding. Another way we reinforce detachment is through spiritualizing. Spiritualizing. We may admit that we're needy, but we deny that we have any need of relationship with other people. It's just Jesus and me. He's all I need. We say that God promises to meet all my needs, so I only take them to Him. But when we spiritualize our neediness, we're denying the fact that God meets our needs by working through other people. So, we've talked a lot about trust injuries. First, before we get into really how to repair them, any questions or comments up to this point? Anyone? The process of attachment, detachment, and everything?
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward. I mean, sure, we have different types of relationships. But when we start detaching from one group, we really end up detaching from almost everybody. Eventually. Yeah. Yes.
One thing interesting, we adopted 2 girls. One gets foster class. There's like a science behind that. When a child goes through trauma, it's that attachment cycle, that cycle being broken of trust, somebody needing that trust. They can show brain scans where the brain's development stops because of that. And as a child, they stop learning, they stop, just because that trust cycle is broken. So they not only detach from others, they detach from everything.
Yeah.
Their brain just stops developing.
We've got a situation like that in our family, extended family. One of my wife's sisters has adopted 2 children, and they're Chilean children because they were missionaries in Chile, and they adopted the girl, and she was from a fairly healthy family, but when she was born, the only reason they gave her up, they loved her, but the only reason they gave her up was they had so many kids they couldn't afford to have another one. So they knew she would have a better life with somebody else, and so they put her up for adoption, and my brother and sister-in-law adopted her. And then a few years later, they adopted a boy. They don't know who his parents were at all. He was found under a bridge. That's how they found him, under a bridge. Fast forward now, he's just turning 30. The girl's probably 35 or something. I don't know how old she is. She's done wonderful. Everything's beautiful. She's got married. She's got kids. Very healthy. Young. They're in ministry. And they asked her parents, my brother and sister-in-law, asked her if she wanted to meet her biological family. And she said, no, I don't want to. I appreciate that they put me with, you're my parents. And he was found under a bridge. He's had all kinds of issues in his life. Processing issues. And was stymied for quite a while because why did they not want me? Why did they abandon me? Wanted to meet his parents, but they had no way of, and now he's gone through Teen Challenge and he's finally come through a bunch of this stuff. But all of what you're saying, that was part of his problem. He couldn't process. And he'd had no love in his very first months of life. And it affected him adversely. It is amazing. And it's very true. And he's just now finally found somebody he's interested in, and it looks like, maybe he's found his soulmate, but it's been a hard struggle. And it goes back to the way he was not nurtured in his very early years. Anyone else? Okay, let's talk about how we can repair trust injuries. There's a lot of solutions, several steps, but let me just share some of them with you. Number one, we've already talked about this a little bit, find safe relationships. Find safe relationships. No relationship is going to be perfectly safe because people aren't perfect, right? But it is possible to find others who will commit to being trustworthy friends in order to help us learn how to trust again. They say things like this: you're needy? Great, so am I. Let's be there for each other and let's grow. Some of us have never had a safe relationship. Therefore, we don't know a clue where to start looking for one or how to recognize it when we find it. Some people try to find safety in dating relationships. The problem with this is that dating is designed to meet a different need, figuring out if the other person is God's choice of a mate. Singles who recognize their need to heal trust injuries would be wise to look for safe relationships away from the dating scene. Learning to trust again should be a top priority before finding that mate, so that the future marriage will start out as a healthy and safe relationship. So let me give you a list of how to assess our current relationships and how to form new ones. Let me give you a list of what safe relationships look like, safe people look like. Now, I got to do it quickly, so if you don't have time to write all this down, you can listen to the recording and write them down. Number one, safe people admit their weaknesses rather than saying they've got it all together. Number two, they're truly spiritual rather than just being religious. Number three, they're open to feedback rather than being defensive. Number four, they're humble rather than being self-righteous. Number five, they change their behavior when they're wrong rather than merely apologizing without changing. You ever heard somebody that's always apologizing, but they never change? Safe people change their behavior when they're wrong. Number six, they deal with their own problems rather than avoid them. Number seven, they earn trust rather than simply demanding trust. They earn it rather than demand it. Number eight, they admit their faults rather than believing they are perfect. Number nine, they take responsibility rather than always blaming others. Number 10, they tell the truth rather than lie. And number 11, they are growing rather than remaining stagnant. A couple of authors by the name of Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend wrote a book called Safe People. And they suggest that a good place to find safe people is in a safe church. But have you ever considered that entire churches can either promote or hinder basic trust among their members? Entire churches. Let me give you a list now of qualities found in safe churches. 9 qualities found in safe churches. Grace is preached from the pulpit and is the foundation for how people are to be treated. Number 2, truth is preached without compromise, but also without a spirit of law and judgment. Truth is preached without compromise, but also without a spirit of law and judgment. Number 3, the church leaders are aware of their own weaknesses and need to grow, and they're open about their hurt, pain, failings, and humanity. They don't try to act like they've got it all together. Number 4, the church uses small groups to touch people's lives, and the sermons focus on community as well as doctrine. Number 5, the culture is one of forgiven sinners, not self-righteous religious Pharisees. Number 6, instead of being a self-contained unit, it avails itself of input from other sources, such as other churches, professionals, and organizations. They realize they have needs as a church, and they don't have it all together. Number 7, the teaching has a relational emphasis as well as a vertical one, or a horizontal emphasis as well as a vertical emphasis. Number 8, the teaching sees brokenness, struggle, and inability as normal parts of the sanctification process. Brokenness, struggle, and inability as normal parts of the sanctification process. Number 9, there are opportunities to serve others through a variety of ministries. So in trying to repair trust injuries, number 1 was find safe relationships. Number 2 is reattach. Reattach. Reattach in the areas where we've withdrawn from life and relationships. And when we become used to a detached lifestyle, reattaching can hurt. We wonder what's happening to us. We feel like we're falling apart, or even like a bomb has blown us into tiny fragments. We may cry at a moment's notice. We speculate whether this could possibly be worth it. It was so much more comfortable just being numb. We need to feel our feelings. The third way that we can repair trust injuries is take risk. Take risks. We have to begin to take some risks. A life of detachment is a life of safety. It's a life of hiding. It's a life of self-protection. But reattaching helps us to get back in touch with what's happening within us. And we have to take some risks by sharing ourselves with other people. Opening ourselves up to other people. We have to become vulnerable in front of others. When we've just spilled our guts, inevitably our first thought will be, how are the others feeling towards me, considering what I've just shared? When you share something, that's the first thought. What are they thinking about me now? You have to take the next step and ask them what they're thinking about you now. Because if you fail to take that second step and ask them what they're thinking, you're going to walk away thinking they're thinking things they may not be thinking. Right? Your perception. In other words, let's just say you opened up and you became vulnerable and you told somebody one of the deep secrets of your life, and maybe, and I'm just using this as an example, that you had involved yourself in a sexual relationship with somebody that you shouldn't have. And now you are suffering the damage from it. And then you say to them, after what I've shared with you, what do you feel about me? You might be surprised to hear they might be saying, I feel so bad that you had to go through that without anybody else, and I'd love to go through that with you. You say, well, what if they say, well, I think you're stupid and you're a jerk? At least you know what they think. And you go to another person. You find another person to confide in. Okay, you have to take risks. You have to take risks. See, we've been hiding from relationships because we thought people would reject us if they knew the truth. But reality most often tells us that admitting our neediness brings us closer to those around us rather than distancing us. That's because people are drawn to real, transparent people with whom they can identify. We can take risks with safe people because they accept us completely, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the fourth step of gaining these, rebuilding these trust relationships, fourth step is that safety actually begins to deepen. We find that we can become increasingly more open and transparent. We can not only feel our feelings, but we can be honest with others about them. We can speak up without fear or intimidation. And we realize that we actually like this new type of lifestyle away from detachment. But here's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind when you're dealing with people. Number one, you have to allow people to fail. As you're forming safe relationships, it's important to understand that none of them will be perfect because people aren't perfect. We all have our shortcomings. And you can count on the fact that at some time or another, a safe person will fail you. They'll show their ugly side, and we may be tempted to back off from the relationship and go back into detachment, but we must resist that temptation at all costs. And then number two, we must accurately assess our relationships. Accurately assess our relationships. The best way to assess our relationships is to think about how much two-way safety is going on. As we've said, no relationship will be perfect. Each of us will disappoint the other at some time. That's a given. So the criteria of whether or not we should stay in a relationship is not perfection, but healthiness. Is there a balance that each person is not only willing to admit their mistakes when they're in the wrong, working to correct them, but also is freely forgiving and unconditionally loving the other when the situation is reversed? In other words, it should not be a one-sided relationship. They've got problems too. We need to be there for them. And are we both working on them? I told you this was some heavy stuff. Any questions or comments? Thoughts? Yes.
Can people be like over trusting? Like trust too many people?
Yes. As we said, you don't want to tell everybody everything. Well, that was another class I just taught. You don't want to tell everybody everything. You don't even tell everybody everything God tells you, because people will talk you out of it.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful that you don't tell everybody everything about you, because if you do, you will be hurt. So yes, definitely. Anyone else? Can what happen indirectly?
So say that there's somebody that broke the trust of somebody else and witness that, so that you no longer trust that person.
Sure. And it's not wrong. That's not wrong. Listen carefully to me. To not trust somebody is not wrong. To not trust anybody is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But people need to prove their trustworthiness. In fact, a lot of times people say, is there ever a time I should walk away from a relationship? Yes, definitely. Many times you should walk away from relationships. Why? Because they're damaging to you. But you need to do so in a healthy way. Anyone else?
Have you ever like experienced yourself when it comes to like trusting God, like finding the solution, the trust development, how to repair, like using that
Towards
in your-
God?
towards in your relationship, like it could be something that
Well, first of all, he's safe.
yeah
So we know he's
Yeah.
safe. But I think with God, it's the same as it is with other people in this sense. It's baby steps. Not because of God, but because of us. Because of us. And until we are, we know up here that he's safe. Sometimes we don't know it here. Why? Because we tend to put on God what we've experienced with other people, transfer to him what we've experienced with other people. And so yeah, you could, but it isn't because of him, it's because of us and the baby steps that we have to take sometimes. Anyone else? Would you say this is heavy stuff? Let's take one more thought, and then we'll go. There's also a relationship between rebuilding trust and boundaries. In other words, I may be trying to rebuild trust with somebody, but I still have to have boundaries. If you've not read the book Boundaries, you need to read that book. Because too many people don't even know what boundaries are. And in other words, maybe I'm trying to rebuild trust with Isaiah over something. So I'm going to go out of my way to try to rebuild that trust. But I'm not going to let him overstep my boundaries. I've got boundaries in place. And so we need to have healthy boundaries even when trying to rebuild trust. And the other person needs to have healthy boundaries so that we're not overstepping our boundaries at them. As an example, just because you've got a need and you want to rebuild trust with somebody doesn't mean that they should enter into a trust relationship with you. Why? Maybe they're in a place in their life where you trying to pull from them would be detrimental to them. Is this making sense to you? I feel the same. Let me use a church illustration here to explain what I mean by that. I think that it's very possible that there are people sitting in every one of the churches. Let's just use one church as an example. I'd say that it's very possible that there are people sitting in every one of the one church campuses who are qualified, let's say, to be a board member. But that doesn't mean it's best for them right now. They might be qualified by all the rules and regulations to be on the board, but they're going through a season of their life when it would be detrimental to them. You tracking with me? As an example, maybe it's and just using this example, maybe one of their kids who's a teenager has been going through some drug issues or things of that nature, and they're through it, but now dad needs to spend time with them. And being on the board would pull from that need in that family. So what is that? That's a boundary. Just because he's qualified doesn't mean the church should pull on him, because it may be detrimental to his family. And I think that's I just use that as an example, that sometimes there are safe people out there, but maybe it's not time for them right now, and you need to find another safe person. Does that make sense? So you need to ask them, do they have time for a relationship like this? Right up front. I'm just talking now, just sort of, because there's a lot more to it than your need. Right? Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Okay. I do have the study guide here. Jenny, I will email it to you tomorrow, so you'll have it. It's got 16 things on it. You could scratch number 16. The other thing I need to mention, I had run out of paper at the house. So we had put scrap paper in the in our printer, and I didn't realize it was still in there. And I figured it out when I saw all these pieces cut here. So if there's anything on the back, you don't need that. You know, I don't think there is on most. But I didn't realize those were still in. I did buy paper, by the way, but I forgot to put it in. So go ahead and pass these around. In fact, could somebody take a couple for the two that aren't here? Give them to them tomorrow.
I'm gonna stop by her house.
You're going to stop by? Oh, you can take one to Jenny? Take one to Jenny, and
I'll take one.
Lexi, take two for the two that aren't here, okay? I think we have enough for everybody and those. If not, tomorrow you can make some. We're going to let out early tonight. God bless you. Jenny, you still with me? Okay. Bless you.